So to talk a little bit more in depth about each one of these classes, we'll start with navy beans and we'll do this through each of our major classes here that we tested. So in our navy bean trial this year, we did have 31 entries. 12 of those I'd consider commercial and the remaining 19 would be experimental. Average yields were pretty good on these. They're pretty close to what we talked about across those yields across classes, most in the high 20s to low 30s. With that Sanilac location a little bit lower there, averaging around 20 bags per acre. If we look at our data of our 1 year average, so this is across all 4 of those county locations in the Thumb and Saginaw Valley, sorted numerically highest on the far right and lowest on the far left in pounds per acre. We'll see that in that top 90th percentile, which is also our top statistical group, we have a pretty good mix there of both our experimental and some commercial type entries. One that is rather surprising in here is that we do see HMS medalist really came through this year on yield, which we'll look at. It's not quite that impressive in our 3-year average, but it did have a very good year in 2020 up there with HMS Bounty, which is a new release that we're pretty excited about. And some of these other experimentals that carry some real yield potential with them. And if we want to look, for a comparison here, where some of our standards look like, we talked about Merlin, did have a tough year in some locations, but it's sorted down more towards the middle of the pack, about halfway down our screen here. We have Merlin. Moving on to our 3-year average. So these are interpreted a little bit different here. I tried looking at them in a different manner. So we have this is actually represented as yield as a percent of the check. So our check here, I considered Merlin in this 3-year column. So that would be considered 100% yield. Anything to the right of this is performing better than Merlin on a percentage basis. Anything to the left, is underperforming compared to Merlin. So we have Nautica and Indy. They're trending about 5% less yield over those 4 locations than Merlin does. When we look to our right, we have HMS medalist. It's about 4% better. Statistically, it's grouping with Merlin still, but numerically, we have about 4% more yield. And we continue that trend with Argosy and Blizzard within that statistical group, anywhere from 3 to maybe 7% increased yield. We do see some other traits of interest with these, such as Blizzard has some pretty good dry down, so it has been an attractive option for growers based on that trait in comparison to Merlin. As we continue across, then we have Apex and Armada pushing a little more yield. Armada is another new one, along with HMS Bounty, which has been a pretty exciting new bean for us. It's about 17% performance over Merlin as far as yield across those 4 locations, which ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 weights per acre as an advantage towards HMS Bounty over Merlin. We'll go on kind of a quick little picture tour of what some of these do look like. We'll just numerically rank them. Starting off with our standard of Merlin, we can clearly see that green stem. This was in Tuscola County this year. We had some stand issues with that as well, but that's that green stem that we were talking about that can be a difficult issue for us compared to medalist, which is not displaying that trait, ranked number 6. As we move up our rankings to Argosy, we can see it's got a little bit of that green stem trait in it as well. Not quite like we've seen in Merlin, but it can have a tendency to go green on us. With Blizzard, they're ranked number 4. We can see that it does have some superior dry down type traits to it. Moving up again, we have Apex on our left and Armada on our right. Apex can show a little bit of that green stem. It generally loses it as it continues to dry, but it has been kind of a little bit of a concern with it. Armada has fairly good dry down and good standability. And then our number 1 rank for HMS Bounty, we have a picture of it, completely dried down here on the left, and one where it's still holding on a little bit of its leaves, a week or so ahead of that. Our HMS Bounty has been a pretty exciting one for us. has pretty good structure to it, pretty good dry down, and hopefully continues that performance as it really gets its feet under it as a commercial bean. So I'll change pace a little bit here. We're still going to be talking about navy beans, but we did do some fertility and fertilizer type work this year in relationships to specifically navy beans. So for this trial, we utilized Merlin navy beans as our variety that we tested. And we looked at micronutrient application methods. So all of these treatments, 1 through 4, was designed to look at different application methods of zinc and manganese. So our first treatment here, we have a completely untreated with no micronutrients applied. The only fertilizer this would have been our base rates of nitrogen. For treatment 2, we mixed 32 ounces of a zinc product along with 32 ounces of a manganese product into that base rate of nitrogen and applied it via 2x2. Treatment 3, we tank mixed these same 32 ounces in with our post weed control application. And applied them at that post timing somewhere in that V2 to V3 type range as a foliar micronutrient application. And then our last one was applied at R1. This was not applied with fungicide because we don't apply fungicide to our trials, but it would be that typical timing where you'd be in that field to make a fungicide application with the idea that you could potentially put in your micronutrients at that time. So when we look at yield data for these, our first location was in Huron County. In Huron County, we did elicit a positive response from those micronutrient applications in both our 2x2 timing and our post timing. However, we did not elicit that positive response when we got up to that R1 reproductive timing. When we look at our bay and also Saginaw locations, these did not end up being significant across any of those applications compared to our untreated. However, in Bay, we can see we kind of follow that same type of trend that we had in Huron. We just didn't have the extent of response from that micronutrient application. In Saginaw, it does not appear that we elicited a response from those micronutrients. So any questions on navy beans before we move into black beans? All this information can be found on michiganbean.com/research. And I would encourage you all to take a look at that and study it more in depth as time allows. And also I'm available anytime for questions, either by phone or email.